Stay up to date
Welcome
on the
to
latest
Plain
political
Talk,
news
and
this
happy to be
election
back with you. I
season
took a
for
little time off.
Visit
I took some vacation time, which
inforum.news/port/support.
I'll tell you guys,
3 months of
it's
unlimited
not easy
access to
for
our
me.
news network.
I don't
for only
like
99
being
cents
on
a month.
vacation because I
Subscribe
spend the
now
entire
at
time
inforum.news
not looking at my
/port.
phone, worrying
This
about
podcast is brought to you
what
by
I'm
the North
missing.
Dakota Petroleum
And
Foundation.
I'll tell you, like
From
even
heating our homes,
like Cara Mund, like
empowering
Miss
our
America
vehicles,
decided to
cell
run for
phones,
Congress
clothing, and medical
on the
equipment.
first day of my vacation.
Oil and natural gas
and then I
makes
had to
everyday life
I
better.
wrote a column.
North
and
Dakota
then my
Oil and
editors
Natural
was like,
Gas,
well, we'll publish
advancing the
this, but you're supposed
possibilities.
to be on
Learn
vacation.
more
It's like,
at
I can't help myself.
ndpetroleumfoundation.org.
It's just a part of like I was telling my daughter, she's like,
Communications
"Why are you
Company
working at your
is
vacation?"
proud
She's
to
like,
be
I
a
get
part of the
itchy.
Trust Project.
Like I have this
Learn
thing
more
inside, I have to get it out. I have to get it out into the world before I can relax. So anyway, that was my vacation. It wasn't very relaxing. But now we're going to talk. Hey, the election season is really shaping up, and I'm not just talking about the independent candidates who've jumped into the race. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. But we have a ballot measure. It looks to be, now I say this, it looks to be the only one that's going to be on the ballot in November. Now, the term limits measure is now before the state Supreme Court, so I guess we're gonna find out if they're going to be able to maybe find a legal argument that gets their measure on the ballot. But for the time being, right now, the only ballot measure we'll be voting on statewide is a marijuana measure to legalize recreational marijuana. Here to talk with me about that is David Owen. And oh, by the way, usually Chad Oban joins me on Wednesdays, but Chad had something else going on and couldn't join. So Jamie Selzler, who, like Chad, is a former executive director of the Democratic-NPL, longtime participant in North Dakota state politics. So, Jamie, thanks for having the time to join me today.
Thank you. I'm like the generic version of Chad. I would never say that I won more seats when I was ED than Chad, but other people would probably say that. But I'm here in his footsteps to try to do him proud.
Yeah, this is we have discount Oban today, right? We have generic brand Oban. No, I'm kidding. All right. David's probably wondering when we're going to ask him a question about his ballot measure. David, how were you able to collect valid signatures and get your... It seems like every measure this cycle has been kept off the ballot because of problems with the signature collection process. Yours went through cleanly. Had a couple thousand disqualified or so, which is pretty typical for ballot measures, illegible handwriting and stuff like that. That's pretty typical, but you guys did really good. You got about, in the ballpark, about 8,000 more than you needed. You did well.
Thank you. That's about right. What we did that was a little different is we had multiple levels of compliance across the process. So how it would work is when a petitioner would bring in the petition, we'd first screen it for obvious errors in-house. So we would look at it, I go, okay, this is illegible or it's missing stuff or whatever. And then we would take that and we would send it to an independent level beyond me who would look at it a second time. And only once it cleared both of those levels did we count it. And part of what you do is when you submit your signatures, you give an estimate to the Secretary of State of how many you have. And what a lot of people don't notice is that our estimate is actually lower than the number of signatures the Secretary of State says we submitted.
Yeah, I noticed that. I thought that was kind of funny.
We claim we submitted 25,700 something. And they said, well, no, actually there's 26. We're like, well, yeah, but 300 of them are bad. And they're like, well, we're still going to try and look at them. And so we submitted based on what we thought was good. We didn't just submit a bunch of garbage. And we were doing turn-ins across the state almost daily. Fargo was 3 days a week. Grand Forks was 1 or 2 days a week. Minot was 1 or 2 days a week. Bismarck was 2 days a week. And so we were always ahead of it, auditing them as they came in. Because what a lot of campaigns do is they don't have time, they get busy, and it just starts piling up, and then they can't audit it. And so that's how we were able to get the validity rate so high. And our validity rate, based on what we claimed we had, was a little bit over 90%. Based on what the Secretary of State said we submitted, it was 89. From our numbers, it was 91%. And we're very proud of that validity rate, because that means we were collecting good signatures and the layers of validation were working. And I think that sets the way to do it going forward.
And if I was reading the Secretary of State's memo correctly, it seemed like it was most of yours were again disqualified for things like handwriting problems or whatever, which are tough to catch. It can sometimes be a little subjective. So overall, good job, Jamie. marijuana on the ballot. What do you think?
It's interesting. I moved back to North Dakota last fall, where I'd been in Washington State for a while, where recreational use of marijuana and possession is legalized. Being a North Dakota boy, I thought it was always odd that on the way home from work, I would drive by the gas station and the grocery store and the dispensary. And I'll tell you, having lived there in a place where access was easy and legal, the world didn't end. There were no problems. There was no additional crime or anything like that. So I should say I'm probably not totally impartial on this because I've lived in a place where this was legal, and the scare or fear tactics that I think some anti-legalization people use, I don't think are necessarily held in fact. That said, I'm really curious more about. I really want to talk about the process going forward. How do you win? How do you get the voters to vote for this? I'm curious though, just to get to this point, talk to us about your funding. I mean, I've heard potentially $500,000 was spent on this effort. It's a huge amount of money for something like this. Who's funding this? And other than you, who are some of the folks who are helping pass this?
So we're blessed. After 2018, it became clear that our opposition was going to bring in large amounts of out-of-state money. So in the 2018 campaign, we raised roughly $80,000, the vast majority from in-state donors. And the opposition brought in about $250,000 from a group called SAM, which is a group which opposes marijuana ballot initiatives nationwide. In spite of that, we were still able to make the ballot, and we ran a somewhat successful campaign relative to expectations, getting 40 to 41% of the vote. From there, the national organization saw, hey, North Dakota may be viable, but due to the 2020 pandemic, everything got put on hold for that year. In 2022, the Marijuana Policy Project and other strategic partners engaged with us and said, hey, do you want to take another crack at it? We were, of course we do. And then they contributed a substantial amount, and local dispensary owners from the medical program contributed a substantial amount. And it was roughly a 50-50 split. So it was roughly 50% in-state from dispensary owners, and then roughly 50% from national organizations that have helped us along the way. And that would be all through the Marijuana Policy Project. I don't know exactly how much has come in from them. I'm not the treasurer. Mark Freeze would be able to better answer that question. But that $500,000 number sounds accurate. And a lot of that was spent on legal, and a lot of that was spent on the signature drive, because signature drives have gotten very, very expensive. And people think that the cost of the petition drive is the circulators. That's about half the cost, actually. The other half is on that validation and on that compliance side. And so that's why it got so expensive. But the answer is philanthropists from national and then local dispensary owners in the local at about a 50-50 split.
David, how is this, and I know we had you on before to explain the ballot measure, but and now that we're on the ballot and now that you're on the ballot, I think a lot of people are going to be wondering, how does this work? So, for instance, you mentioned that some of your financial support came from people who are already operating under existing state law that was passed on the ballot, obviously amended a great deal to be workable by the legislature, for medicinal marijuana, where marijuana is already legal to a degree here in North Dakota. Are those existing businesses, those existing dispensaries, are they going to be able to just jump into the recreational marijuana business if this passes? How is that going to work?
So how it's going to work is the legislature is going to designate a department that they want to oversee the recreational marijuana program. By default, it is the Department of Health. However, should the legislature choose, they can designate whatever agency they like with a simple majority. We have that written in there, so they don't need a 2/3. And then you'll go through what are called administrative rules. And in administrative rules, standards will be set for licensure. Standards will be set for how you have to operate. Standards will be set for everything ranging from what does the packaging have to look like to what level of what does the application look like to who can realistically get a license. It's our belief that the medical dispensaries are going to be green-lit into there, but they're still going to have to go through the vetting that anybody else would. Now, obviously, since they passed the vetting for a medicinal facility, it's very likely in our mind that they will pass the vetting for a recreational facility, but there's no automatic guarantee that a medical gets a recreational license. Usually what happens, however, is that a medical facility is going to get the recreational license, and I believe there is some preferential treatment, but they still have to go through the process of the application and being cleared under the regulatory framework.
One quick follow-up. How do we need, listen, the fact that we already have medical marijuana, I think bodes well for this one passing. But my question is, are we going to end up with a dual regime here? I mean, it seems like, do we still need the medical marijuana apparatus if recreational marijuana is legal? I mean, it seems like it becomes redundant. Am I wrong?
In a lot of ways, you're right. There are a few distinctions for the medical program that make sense. Most notable is the tax structure. Typically, you want to tax medicine at a lower rate than you would tax other products. So if it's medical, they may get a lower tax rate in sales. Typically, medical has different content and it's more tailored. So some medical patients need a higher level of THC, but a lower level of CBD. Some medical people need a very high CBD, but a very low THC. But generally speaking, the products would be very similar. We're really only talking about differences of tax rate and differences of treatment for the consumer. So in my mind, once you have a recreational program, you still need some rules on the medical side, but it's very easy to fold it into a recreational program. But it really depends on what the rules they ultimately create are. Like, let's pretend in 7 years, the legislature decides they want a THC cap, right? Well, a THC cap on a medical product would intuitively be higher than a THC cap on a recreational product. So it does give you some flexibility, but generally speaking, you don't need it unless you're trying to heavily regulate.
Curious in others, and I know you have it. It's 19 pages what you've submitted. I have not read it other than the first page, but so educate us on this. In other states where legalizations happened, as either part of it or afterwards, there's a push to remove people from prisons or clean their records if they have been convicted of something a year ago that this year is legal. I guess two questions. One, is that part of this, to go back and expunge records or get people out of jail? And two, if not, do you see that as a logical follow-up should this pass in a couple of months?
So, answer the first question is unfortunately no, it is not. There are concerns over single subject as the courts have gotten more litigious in looking at these measures, and there's concerns over whether or not there is or isn't a single subject rule for ballot initiatives in North Dakota. I would personally assert there aren't. There are good legal arguments that there might be, and so as a result, we couldn't put it in there due to those concerns. Is it a logical follow-through? I personally believe it is. The 2018 one had an expungement program, but thankfully to me it's sort of a moot point at 2022 because of the work done by Representative Roars Jones and other representatives in the legislature. We now have a way to seal marijuana records either by a governor's pardon, depending on the offense, or through a different generalized record sealing program that people can apply to. It typically requires you to have had no subsequent offenses for a period of time. And it's not, in my mind, an unreasonable period of time. Obviously, I wish that it were day one once you leave, you're expunged. But what we have now is a reasonable compromise, in my opinion. And the Republican legislature has actually done a really good job on that. It started with the Governor Burgum pardon program. And the late Attorney General Wayne Stenjum actually encouraged the attorneys of record for people with marijuana charges to reach out to their clients to apply for the pardon system. I think it's a program that doesn't get enough use. it doesn't get enough exposure, but we do have those programs.
I'm kind of glad that the expungement thing isn't in this measure, not because I don't support that as a policy outcome, but just as a practical political matter. I think sometimes if you try to do too many things at once, your argument becomes complicated, and complicated arguments don't win at the ballot. I would rather let's take the step of getting marijuana legal, and then we can work on some of that other stuff if it still needs work after that. You know, I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good, I guess is what I'm trying to say. How about, I'm trying to think ahead to what some of the arguments against your measure are going to be, because certainly we've had this in the past when we've had debates about both medicinal marijuana and obviously recreational marijuana. But walk us through some of the concerns. Impact on crime. I mean, that always seems to be a big one. I think that's less of a concern now. When you looked at some of the states that were first through the first to do this, the first to kind of, nullify federal prohibitions and say, listen, we're going to go our own. They really did have some problems. I don't think we should ignore that. Places like Colorado, they did. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that they were among the first, right? They were going, and I think we're kind of past that now, both culturally, right? Like, marijuana is not a big a deal as it used to be. And I don't know that if it's legalized in North Dakota, a lot of people are going to feel like they need to go out and get crazy with it. Where, sort of like, when you saw like prohibition fell for alcohol, right? And people went nuts for a little while. I don't know that we're going to have that, partly because our prohibition isn't working and everybody who wants marijuana is already getting it, frankly. I mean, that's the reality of it. But I just speak to that a little bit, because I feel like in the coming months, we're going to hear people out there saying this is going to be terrible for North Dakota, crime's going to spike, all these things. How do you address those concerns?
So I actually hate the Colorado comparison, because as you mentioned, we have other states that have done it, including our neighbors, right? If you look at every state around us, to the west, we have legal marijuana. To the right, we have Minnesota, who now has an edibles program somehow.
Accidentally. Accidentally.
To the north of us, we have Canada, which is fully legalized. And to the south, we had South Dakota, which was legal for a period of time. And there was a legal snafu, which caused them to become prohibited again. And by all indications, they're going to be legal again this November. And we're at the point where we're surrounded. But Minnesota, right? They accidentally did it. They didn't have any infrastructure in place. They passed it on accident. And they haven't seen any problems. Minnesota today is no different than Minnesota was 6 months ago, right? And that was a state that was completely unprepared for it, that didn't intend to do it, and had no infrastructure in place, no debate, no planning for it, and still no substantial problems emerged. And so I think that's actually the best example, because what we see is when Midwestern states legalize, they don't experience the issues that the early states did. And you can argue why that is or isn't, but I think it has a lot to do with what you said, that people are used to it now. And the reality is not just that people can get it illegally. Anyone who wants it in Bismarck can drive to Billings or Bozeman. It's not that long of a drive, and they can get it. And so when you're surrounded, you're at the point where people, if they want it, will be getting it. And so it's going to be different. And that's what we saw when places like Bozeman legalized.
Who is the organized opposition to this, or is there? I mean, I think maybe religious groups, maybe some groups that are further on the right. Obviously, you're extremely organized. You have a committee. You have a massive amount of fundraising happening for this. Who's on the other side? Not just what ideas or what they're saying, but who are they? And do you know anything about the campaign they're running against yours?
So, unfortunately, the opposition always has the advantage in a ballot initiative campaign, because they can hide. And they don't have to disclose themselves, not when they raise their first dollar, but until they spend their first dollar. So typically what happens is you don't see any opposition until, call it October, and then literally like the flick of a switch, the opposition has a bank account with $400,000 in it, and you got to be prepared for that. And traditionally it's done through a group called SAM, which stands for Smart About Marijuana. They're an opposition group with a great name. And they are the ones who predominantly raise the money and predominantly fight it. In North Dakota, in the past, you've had people like Steve Shields, who owns Shields Sporting Goods, be a major donor. There were rumors about the chamber receiving money from individuals who were very opposed to it. I'm not going to name who those individuals were because it's a rumor, but we know that the chamber raised about $50,000 to $60,000 to fight it. And then there were certain people in, we'll call it Republican spheres, who raised money to fight it, such as Wayne Stenhjem, I believe, put in $2,000. There were people that put in a little bit token amount of money. But the vast majority of the money came from the chamber, Mr. Shields, and SAM, which does not have to disclose its donors beyond themselves as an entity. And typically, we believe that it is a predominantly faith-based organization, and we believe that a lot of their donors are socially conservative, but we don't confirm that. In North Dakota, the one other thing is the far right is typically actually in favor of this. If you look at the Bastiat caucus, you can have your opinions on them, but their sort of head honcho, Rick Becker, said on the radio a couple of days ago that he supports it. If you look at how the vote came down in the legislature, there was a fairly substantial Bastiat caucus support. We got, for example, Cole Christensen. We got, there are others that we got who aren't comfortable being publicly known as Bastiat, so I won't name them. But we got a substantial support from the Bastiat caucus. So in North Dakota, it's weird in that, you don't have the opposition from what would be considered far right. So that's just a unique North Dakota thing.
Yeah, there are elements of that group, because when I've written about this, I mean, a lot of the Facebook comments I get are coming kind of from that crowd, and I think that's really what marijuana's become, though, is it's not an easily defined partisan issue. I mean, David, you're a Republican. I mean, you've worked to help elect Republican candidates. I have a feeling that some of the opposition may be coming from some Democrats. So I don't know. It's not a clearly defined partisan issue like maybe a lot of other issues are. Which really I think makes it interesting to talk about. Our attitudes about it have evolved over the years, and frankly, I think some really healthy ways. And I should be clear, I don't have zero interest in smoking marijuana. There's some people on Twitter, because I write whenever marijuana comes up. I think it's a really interesting topic, and I write about it a lot. And so I have these people that call me a pothead all the time, right? Which anybody who knows me is the funniest thing in the world. I don't even like taking Tylenol that much. Like I when the doctor, I hurt my back or something, the doctor prescribes me a pain pill. Like a lot of times, man, I really got to be in pain before I take it. I'm not judging anybody else. It's just a personal decision for me. I don't like using it. I don't have any interest in using it. For me, it's just all about, I've been offered marijuana by some very surprising people that I could probably name, who have said, hey, you want to smoke a joint or something? And it's like, well, no, not into that. It's everywhere. We're not stopping it. It's already here. I guess that's always been my belief, that we should legalize it because we're not stopping anybody anyway.
So if you look at the divide, I think the single dividing factor is age. In my mind, when you look at how it breaks down, there's a group of people who are, call it between 55 and 75, who very strongly oppose it. And then most other people are typically in favor at about 60-40. And then there's the Vietnam generation, where it goes back to being about 50-50. And in some cases, in some polls that you see, depends on who you ask, it's 60-40 in favor. And so it's really an age thing. And that is what I have noticed. It's not a Republican-Democrat issue. It's a young, old, very old issue. And that's really what it is. The one thing I do want to also add to that is, what we lastly see is in states that legalize, none of them have ever attempted to go back to prohibition. So in states that have passed legalization, there has never been a ballot initiative that got enough support to overturn it and go back to prohibition, which means that once it's legalized, people typically like it and people don't mind it. And there's a lot of fear And I believe that's from how they were raised we've all seen the movies, right? And the propaganda. And I believe that's how they were raised. And once it happens, they realize it's not a big deal. And that's why no state has ever gone back with enough signatures to take it off.
It's interesting. I think one thing that maybe you have going for you, and maybe minds are changing on this. I lost someone a number of years ago, close to me, to an opioid overdose. And I am sort of convinced that I am sure that if this person had access to marijuana to deal with chronic pain, I don't think they would have used opioids, and I think they would probably still be here. I suspect there are many folks like that. And even having medicinal access, just the bar to get it is difficult. And it's harder right now. It's harder to get medicinal marijuana than it is to go out and get something with fentanyl or, some sort of opioid. So I'm not sure if that's part of why people will vote for this. I suspect that they will vote for this. So I just wanted to throw that out there as I think it's a solution for that. But I'm curious I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I don't want you to give us your campaign plan because, you don't want your opposition to know, but just high level, how are you going to get this across the finish line? Are you looking at TV ads? Are you looking at hiring canvassers to just go out and knock on doors and contact voters? This is going to be a low turnout election, which I think actually makes this a little more difficult for you. So what's your plan there?
So our plan is to reach voters where they are across a variety of different contacts. We want to make sure that we are out on the campaign trail and we are talking to every North Dakotan that we can to make sure they understand what they're voting on. And we think once we present our arguments, they're going to vote in favor. It's going to look similar in many ways to our strategy on the signature drive, in that we could have just done it in Fargo, right? We had the ability to just gun in Fargo, make it on the ballot, and call it a day. But we chose not to. We chose to have circulators in Forks, Fargo, Bismarck, Minot, Dickinson, and Williston. And we believe that if you reach people where they are, that they're going to come around and support this. And so our strategy is going to revolve around contacting voters and making sure they understand the issue. And it's not just going to be a run up the score in Forks and Fargo and pray that's enough. It's going to be a campaign across the state. And that's about what I can tell you.
And that's I think it's a smart strategy because, again, I think that this cuts across political, cultural, ideological lines, unlike a lot of other issues. I think, David, you were very astute in saying that age is probably the one place where you could really draw some definitive lines on feelings about it. But outside of that, I think it's smart to take a whole state approach because I think you're going to find support across the whole state. I personally think this measure will pass, and I guess my last question for you, prediction on the outcome. What percentage of vote do you think you're going to get?
More than 50. I made a joke with a lot of people when we submitted signatures that all I wanted to see when I got the letter back from the Secretary of State was the number starting with 2 for the number of valid signatures. Because that meant I didn't have to read anything more. I want this to be starting with a 5, so I don't really have to keep watching it, and once it's above a certain number, it's done. But I think that what's really telling is you had legislators who said that this was inevitable in the legislature. You had multiple legislators that the only reason I'm voting on it's going to happen anyway. And these legislators are in tune with their districts, right? I think Senator Lee knows District 13 probably better than anyone on this earth in terms of its turnout. And so when Senator Lee looks and goes, look, it's going to happen, right, she's speaking for her district.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of legislators who said, this is going to happen in my district, and we're going to have to do it. And we have an option to do it here or by ballot initiative. And the fact that they were willing to say for the first time that it was inevitable is sort of a canary in the coal mine, right?
Well, David, I thank you so much. I thank you so much for your time. We're gonna sign off there. We'll say goodbye to David, and move on to a conversation between Jamie and I. By the way, I was remiss in saying this. David's group's name is New Approach ND. I'm such a great podcast host. I forget all that. I just assume everybody knows who David is, like I know David. But David, New Approach ND is the place to go. They're on social media. They're on the internet. If you want to find out more information about their campaign, you can certainly look about that. And there's going to be no shortage of media coverage of this as well, because it's an important debate. But I agree with you, David. I think it's going to pass. But we'll let you go here, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. NewApproachNorthDakota.com is our website. New Approach North Dakota is the Facebook page. And if you want updates from the campaign, potentially yard signs, maybe T-shirts. Can't promise anything, but maybe T-shirts soon. Join our mailing list and check out the website, NewApproachND.com.
Thanks, David.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chad Kuhl, host of the Northland Outdoors podcast. Hey, here in the Northland, we love our time outside. And on the Northland Outdoors podcast, we're going to talk about all of it. Not just fishing, not just hunting, but mountain biking, camping, rock climbing, bird watching, you name it. We're going to have it on the Northland Outdoors podcast. New episodes every 2 weeks on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So look for it and join us on the Northland Outdoors podcast.
Well, having just finished up our interview with David Owen, I think that's going to be an interesting topic. But let's move on. Jamie, I had to. You were saying towards the latter part of that interview that this was going to be a low turnout election in North Dakota, but it's gotten a lot more exciting in the last couple of weeks than I think a lot of people thought it would. Miss America has now entered the sweepstakes for the United States House. Cara Mund. By the way, if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I apologize. I don't listen to anything. I read everything, and so sometimes my pronunciations are off. So, Cara, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, I'm sorry. I mean it as no slight. But we're gonna go with Cara because Jamie watched some YouTube videos beforehand, and he said that's what they were saying. So that's what we're gonna stick with. Cara Mund. She's running for the United States House, and Rick Becker made an entry back into the United States Senate after much folderol at the Republican State Convention earlier this year about respecting the process and abiding by the will of the delegates at the convention. Now he's back in the race as an independent. And, boy, a lot there to talk about. Let's start with Cara Mund, Jamie. What do you think of her candidacy?
I was really surprised, as I'm sure many other people were. I fully expected she was going to run for office at some point. She sort of made it clear she wanted to be a governor one day. I figured maybe in a couple years or 6 years, she may throw her hat in the ring. I still don't really know what political party she belongs to, although based on her beliefs, she definitely probably leans a little bit more to the left on at least a couple of issues. So my initial response was, why? And this is, I have to acknowledge, I ran a political party, so I tend to think that independent runs for anything are a waste of time and money. And if you really want to try to win, you run under a party banner and go that route. So my initial reaction when I saw that was thinking, she has no chance. Why is she doing this? But I sort of came around a little bit on it that, I think if you are wanting to get elected to something statewide in North Dakota, as a Democrat, or even as an independent, the best way to do that is to run a few times and get some experience. If you look at the history of our statewides, people like Kevin Kramer and Ed Schaefer and Quentin Burdick, and you can go down the list of folks who ran Heidi Heitkamp, people who ran statewide and lost, learned a ton and came back. So I don't think she's going to win. I think she has a shot at second place. But my view when I heard she was running, after thinking about it, is she's going to get some great experience, and I bet she'll be a great candidate down the road.
For me, it's always first of all, I am immediately, I don't want to use hostile, but it's probably accurate, to celebrity candidates. I don't like Dr. Oz, Herschel Walker, Donald Trump. It drives me nuts. I want people who in politics who have gained notoriety because they served the public in some way before they reached a place like Congress. Like, I want to see that you were on a school board, that you were in a legislature, that you put in some time, and that you also have a body of work within the arena of policymaking that we can point at. Because I don't think we've done well. Jesse Ventura, I don't think we've done well with celebrity candidates. I don't think there are many examples out there of people who have crossed that bridge without first building up a meaningful body of work as they've shifted from sort of celebrity into the world of public policy. That's really important. Now, I know that maybe that's naive for me to say, right? Because we live in this era where, I'm Dr. Oz. People love that stuff, right? So maybe I'm just old-fashioned, but I don't know. Like, I think it's presumptuous to run for Congress on a track record of being this. And I realize she went to Harvard, she went to Brown, she has some substance there. I'm not trying to say that she's a stupid person. I think she probably has a lot going for her, that she's smart. But in terms of palpable policy-making experience, where you show me that you can do the work, that you can be an effective congressperson, it's not there for me. And it's not there for a lot of celebrity candidates. And I'm sorry, being a celebrity means nothing to me as a voter. Like, I don't care. You're Kid Rock. You're really good at making. I don't think that doesn't make me want to vote for you for president. Do something in that realm that makes me want to vote for you. Am I being unfair?
I think maybe you are. I guess I agree with you on a high level. I don't love the celebrity candidates. That said, I think there's a huge difference in these types of candidates running for legislative versus executive offices. So celebrity candidates for governor, for president, I have concerns about that because when you're in an executive, you have to know how to lead an organization, and someone whose experience has been managing, a small number of people, or a football player, or a reality TV show host. Folks like that don't have the right executive experience or legislative experience. So I agree with you when it comes to executive. I don't necessarily agree on the legislative races.
Why?
Because I think when you're electing someone, whether it be to the state legislature or U.S. Senate, you're trying to find someone who you think has values that align with yours, that will vote in a way that you would vote for the most part if you were sitting in that chair. And I don't think someone needs to have a specific background in order to accomplish those things.
Let me my rebuttal to that, though, is a lot of it is it's not just competence, although competence is hugely important. To me, it's also motivation and incentive, because celebrities are motivated by getting headlines, right? People, that's their incentive, is to entertain, is to get attention. We have enough of that in Congress. In fact, one of the great problems, I think, with the political world is that because there's so much more focus on it, I mean, starting with like the C-SPAN effect in Congress, where, the speeches on the floor got longer and more flamboyant and everything when the TV cameras, now everybody, is basically on stage all the time thanks to social media. I think that's one of the reasons why so many politicians have themselves become sort of entertainers, right? I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, these are not people who are in Congress to make good policy. These are people who are there to be celebrities. And I don't want that. I don't want anybody who comes from that world in politics.
Yeah. I think that's why you have to look at each candidate individually. Someone like a Herschel Walker in Georgia has made an absolute fool of himself with some of the things he's said and how completely unprepared he is. Back to North Dakota for Cara Mund. Give her, let's see what she has to say. She seems so far to have actual policy beliefs. I think she's going to have to verbalize how she's going to actually get that stuff done if she's elected. I think she'll have to talk about which party she's going to caucus with if she's elected.
That's a point. That's a point I made earlier this week.
Critical things. But I would not say just because someone was Miss America a few years ago that disqualifies them. I'm putting words in your mouth, but I don't think just because someone is a celebrity that should be the reason solely not to vote for them. I think it can be one of the issues someone considers.
Sure. And let me state my position quickly. I don't think it's immediately disqualifying. To me, like, the bar goes up. To me, it's like, if you're a celebrity, to me, that doesn't help you. That hurts you. You have to overcome that, in my mind, as a voter. That's something she has to overcome. I count that against her. You are a celebrity. I count that against you. Show me you're serious about this. Show me that you're something more than somebody who's just trying to add line items to a resume as the next stepping stone to whatever entertainment industry you're going to do. You're going to have to prove that to me.
Well, and I think the kind of campaign that she puts together will tell that story. Even in North Dakota, I generally think that the best candidate wins. And, unfortunately, that often is Republicans, but that can be because they raise more money and have a stronger campaign plan. So I think, there's 3 months left for her to tell the story of, can she hire a competent staff? Can she put together an actual campaign plan? Can she be strategic in terms of where she goes out and gets those votes? If this is just a sort of a celebrity ego trip, which I don't think it is, but if it is, then it'll be an entirely social media run campaign that has no substance beyond that.
Well, she said it. She said at one point
it's probably about building name ID more than anything. But.
Right. Yeah. Well, she said she's her own campaign manager, her own campaign treasurer, her own. She went down the list
because she just got started. All those candidates are when they get started. So yeah. I know that my first question when I saw she was running is like, who's running her campaign? Because for those of us who are sort of inside baseball on this, like that matters a ton about how serious someone is. And of course, I don't know if there is anyone, but I do know this. There are some people who are helping her that I'm aware of, friends of mine, who are helping at least with the collecting signatures and putting events together. People who are highly experienced political hands. And I don't think they're running a campaign overall, but I think that they've started engaging. She will find someone to run the campaign, and we'll see what happens from there.
Yeah. I mean, her big issue obviously is abortion, right? She said that was one of the big reasons why she just decided to get in. The Roe v. Wade precedent was overturned, and, she's going to have to talk about it. But one of the problems, too, I think, with independent candidates is everybody notionally likes this idea of the independent, like I'm not with either side. But the problem is when you start talking about actual policies, there are sides. Are you for this or against this? What is your philosophy for the judiciary, right? I mean, these are things that really matter. And I think these people who kind of want like, oh, I'm independent, I'm above all that. Nobody's really above all that. At the end of the day, the voters expect you to take positions on issues. And so far, but for a couple, she's a question mark on a lot of these issues. And I think as she starts answering those questions, she's going to get defined. She may not want to be defined, and it's easier a lot of times to campaign if you're undefined, which probably gets back to my idea that having a track record matters because we can go and look at it. In the legislature, how did you vote? On the city council, how did you vote? She doesn't have any of that, and she has the luxury of kind of being everything to everybody.
Yeah, that's the thing. Track records can hurt you too. They don't just help you. She has the ability to completely define herself, and the only thing that people who are opposed to her are going to be able to say is she's a celebrity.
Right. I realize as a political professional, Jamie, you think that's a good thing. As somebody who wants people who make good policy and are serious minded, I think it's a bad thing. I don't want to put people in Congress that are a question mark. I don't want question marks in Congress. I don't know. Again, call me old fashioned. I think it's going to be interesting. I don't think she's going to win. I think there's a chance she could do better than Mark Haugen, just because obviously, and I say this, I feel a little bit bad for Mark Haugen. He's going to get big-footed here a little bit. Such an honorable man, a good man, who I disagree with about just about everything, but is a very good person who I think jumped in to help the Dem NPL. Have a candidate on the ballot, and now is going to get big-footed by Cara Mund, and because of the abortion issue. I mean, Mark Haugen is pro-life, which makes him an oddity, a rarity in Democratic circles. Cara Mund's not, and she's going to peel a lot of Democrat votes away from him because of that.
I think she'll certainly peel some away. This is going to be a base turnout election. I think that we'll talk about Rick Becker in a second, I'm sure, but him getting this race probably helps Kelly Armstrong, because people who weren't going to vote anyway are probably going to show up and vote for Becker and will vote for Kelly. They're not going to vote for Cara Mund. And so I don't think she'll siphon off a ton of votes. I don't think she's going to siphon off much from the Republican side. She might get some of the pro-choice Republicans, as few as there are left these days, but she might get some of them. And she'll get some Democrats, but
I think that's the problem. Is she's gonna split the sort of left of center vote with Mark Haugen, and there weren't enough. Mark Haugen already wasn't going to get enough votes to win, and I think that's going to be tough. So we'll see how that. Let's talk Rick Becker. That's a very interesting one in that I guess if you could, I don't want to say that Cara Mund's challenging Mark Haugen from the left, but on the one issue, I guess that's kind of out front in that race so far, she kind of is, whereas Rick Becker is coming at John Hoeven from the right, and I was surprised he jumped in. I think that's a very short-term move. I think it's an expression of anger, of frustration, and not a lot of long-term thinking. And like my column yesterday argued, to hear the NDGOP tell it at this point, Rick Becker's left the party. And I think that's going to hurt him maybe more than he realizes. And don't get me wrong, he's got a following. He could very well take second place in that race. But there's going to be a lot of Republicans who might otherwise have supported Rick Becker who aren't going to support him now because he left the party.
I think that a lot of it is ego, and I think he reached his peak of North Dakota fame and I'm a true North Dakotan. North Dakota fame is not very famous in the big picture, but if you're famous in North Dakota, people know you. That all disappeared for him the minute that he lost that endorsement and said he wasn't running in June. So it's all over for him, and I think that he probably misses it. And I think there's a lot of this that's just ego. It's certainly not policy-based, because he and all these other people who trash Hoeven's voting record and how terrible he is in Congress or in the U.S. Senate, he has the same record as Kevin Cramer, yet they sort of bow down and think Kevin Cramer is the greatest thing ever. I think they're both terrible, but that's just me. The fact that he's doing it tells me he doesn't actually, like, if he really wanted to make a difference and try to win, he would start running against Kevin Cramer, who's up in a couple of years. But he just needs the ego fed. I think there's also a possible chance that he thinks being on the ballot is going to get out some of the far right who will put some Republicans over the line in legislative races. So I think that's certainly possible that he's doing it in his mind for his greater good, which is to elect more Bastiats. He may be doing that, but this seems very unplanned and spur of the moment.
I feel like a little bit he's riding Cara Mund's coattails, right? Like he kind of saw what she did and said, oh, look at all the attention she's getting. I could get some of that attention too. The Bastiat, that's interesting. I was thinking about that, but I'm also looking like, what are the races where that's going to matter? Like where, I mean, most of the Bastiats, I mean, it's like the Republican primary is over. A lot of them won. There's no competitive race on the general. Like who's he helping in your mind?
If you're looking at legislative races, the races where Republicans have the best chance of picking off Democrats, the Republicans are smartly running fairly moderate candidates. I mean, moderate for Republican candidates. And not
it's all right. It's all right for you to admit that there are moderate Republicans.
I'm just saying, being moderate in a far right party is still being pretty part of it.
Goodness gracious!
But I mean, so they're running better candidates than they are in some of these places, like especially out west, where they don't have to worry about actually winning. And so maybe I don't know. That's why I think it's mostly ego based. But, it's fascinating. Until your column, I was not aware that Republicans had a policy that said if you ran as an independent, you were basically excommunicated from the party for whatever it was, 6 years or something.
I don't think. Well, it's interesting they did it after Al Jaeger had to run as an independent because they if people don't remember, last time Al Jaeger ran for re-election, the party nominated a guy who ended up having a peeping Tom conviction on his record. He stepped down off the ballot. Al Jaeger ran as an independent and, of course, is still a Republican. That obviously a very different scenario than what Rick Becker's doing. I don't begrudge the party having that rule. I don't like the rule, and Cara Mund's talked about it. I don't like the rule where candidates necessarily have to pay to be considered at the convention. I think there's maybe another way to measure, but I don't think the party's under any obligation to support candidates who run against their candidates. I don't have a problem with that rule. Rick Becker, John Hoeven's the endorsed candidate for the Republican Party. He competed against Rick Becker at the state convention, and he won. Rick Becker had the opportunity to put himself on the June primary ballot and let Republicans across the state vote on it. He chose not to. So John Hoeven won in June. John Hoeven won in April. John Hoeven is the candidate. Now Rick Becker, an independent, is running against the Republican endorsed candidate. I think this is very interesting. I don't think the North Dakota Republican Party is under any obligation to treat Rick Becker like he's a member in good standing anymore.
Maybe Rick Becker's just addicted to being humiliated by John Hoeven. Humiliated at the convention, humiliated into not running in June, and now he's going to be humiliated in November by him as well. And in the process, he's going to help Katrina Christensen, who I think has a bright future in Democratic politics in North Dakota. So I don't know, maybe he just wants to help the Democrat. I have no clue what his thinking about it is. It's certainly not policy-based. Whatever he says, it's not policy-based. I think it's ego-based. I think he just doesn't like John Hoeven.
I made this argument back when, obviously, we were having the competition at the state convention. But even, I think the knock on John Hoeven is stylistic rather than substantive, which is to say it's not really based on his policies. If you're a conservative and you look at John Hoeven's policies, they're not far. He's one of the most conservative members of the United States Senate. And I realize maybe the senator, they're not doing everything you like, whatever. But boy, there are a lot of, we could be doing a lot worse in terms of a senator. I think a lot of it's stylistically. He's not a bomb thrower, right? He's not going to be out there lighting people up over the latest, Fox News outrage. He just doesn't do that. And I think anymore, that's the litmus test for many Republicans. That's the litmus test. You have to be upset about whatever Tucker Carlson was talking about last night, or you're a rhino.
I think we don't need to belabor this, but here's my concern with John Hoeven is that he's the first senator we've had in an extremely long time who just votes with the party line, whatever the leader tells him to do. And this is both parties. There is no question that when Conrad and Dorgan were in the Senate, they were specific advocates for North Dakota. They'd speak up, they'd fight their leadership. John Hoeven is the very definition of a backbencher who does whatever Mitch McConnell tells him to do.
I think that's unfair. Boy, I think that's unfair.
And I think, but that's I think he's voting in line with what probably most North Dakotans want for a lot of issues.
Right. I think calling him a backbencher.
You're right. He's not a bomb thrower, and I think that's what Rick Becker wants.
Calling him a backbencher, that's a very different dynamic. Byron Dorgan, Earl Pomeroy, Kent Conrad were obliged to buck their party leadership because their party leadership represented things that North Dakotans didn't want. If they wanted to continue getting elected in North Dakota, they had to break with Democrats. John Hoeven doesn't have to do that because most Republicans pretty much want what the Republican Party most of the time is lining up behind. It's very easy to do that. Now, do I wish that John Hoeven and Kelly Armstrong and Kevin Kramer, for that matter, would break with some of the Trump loyalty stuff? Absolutely. But that's really a separate issue than the substantive policy stuff. I mean, name to me a vote for that John Hoeven took that most North Dakotans don't support.
I think the fact that he just voted to prevent the capping of costs on insulin. I think most North Dakotans would like to cap insulin costs, and he voted against it.
But insulin costs were not the only thing in that bill.
But it was an amendment to the bill. He could have put that in there. But even when the vote didn't matter to the end result, he still chose to vote against sending a message that, no, I do think if this is going to pass, at least it's going to pass with an insulin cap.
If you think that's going to cost him votes in November, you're kidding yourself.
I didn't say it's going to cost him votes. You asked me what's an issue that he voted against interests of North Dakotans. I think that's one of them.
All right.
We could probably go through a bunch of them over the years that I have concerns about. But I don't like the fact that I have a senator in John Hoeven who is a backbencher, the definition of a backbencher. And I would like to see someone more vocal. I mean, Kevin Kramer, I have concerns with, but at least Kevin Kramer's putting himself out there. And Hoeven isn't. Hoeven's just a good, reliable Mitch McConnell, John Thune vote.
I think there's something to be said about that. I mean, I realize it's different paths. He has a very different approach than Kevin Kramer, even really a different approach than Kelly Armstrong. Obviously, Kelly working in a different chamber, but I think he's also very effective. I think he's very effective. I don't think you need to be loud and ostentatious and on every cable news show every night to be effective in the United States Senate. There's 100 of them. There's a lot of senators that people don't know the names of that are the same as John Hoeven. I don't know that makes them necessarily backbenchers. You can be influential and get a lot done like that.
Yeah, you're gonna hate this. John Hoeven is a triumph of mediocrity. And if you look, and I'm giving him this. If you look at the history of the state of North Dakota, I think he's probably the most popular politician we've ever had. And I think, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
I think you guys don't like him because you can't beat him.
I think the people I can't beat that I think the world of, but he's not one of them. No.
All right. Well, fair enough. Let's move on. Liz Cheney.
I like him personally. I think he's a great guy personally, but politically, I'm not a fan.
So this is, I'm going to ask you now to weigh in on intra-party politics. Liz Cheney losing in Wyoming. There were 10 members of the United States House of Representatives that voted to impeach Donald Trump. 4 of them opted not to run for re-election, and 4 of them have now been defeated in primaries, and we still have 2 that are an open question. Liz Cheney, obviously the loudest of those 10 on the January 6th committee, has gone down swinging even now. She had a quote, and I quoted this in a column I wrote this morning, that she told Jonathan Martin at the New York Times. And it was such a great quote. It said, "If the cost of standing up for the Constitution is losing the House seat, then that's a price I'm willing to pay." And I was thinking, Jamie, about what she's paid. She is, in some ways, before all this, was sort of Republican political royalty, right? She was daughter of Dick Cheney. She was up to the Trump era, had a very successful, was having a very successful tenure in the United States House of Representatives. Easily, she was in a safe Republican state, Wyoming. Had a leadership position within the Republican caucus. Probably you could see it, obviously, if the stars aligned and Republicans had the majority at the right time. This is somebody who you could have seen as Speaker of the House one day. This is somebody who you could have seen moving up the ladder quite a ways. And she chose to turn, I don't want to say turn her back on it. That's the wrong word. She chose to put all that at risk, and now probably has lost a great deal of it in order to take a stand on Donald Trump. You look at so many other Republicans who have been willing to just sort of put their heads down, and even when they disagree with Donald Trump, just not say much about it, because that's the politically safe thing to do. She chose to do something else, and I just think that is so admirable. It frustrates me that she lost. I think she's more of the sort of leadership that we need in Congress, frankly, from both sides. But that she lost, and that's a tough thing.
It is. It's only been 2 years ago there was an open Senate seat in Wyoming, and had she chosen to run for it, she would have won in a landslide, and we'd have Senator Liz Cheney now, and her type of politics in relation to Donald Trump works just fine in the U.S. Senate. She'd be right there alongside the Mitch McConnells and the Lisa Murkowskis, who I suspect will win again, and the rest of the crew. But she chose not to, probably because she saw a path to being Speaker one day. I think that we're just seeing the start of Liz Cheney's political career. I suspect that history is going to be incredibly kind to her for the stand that she took. And I think she truly believes, I agree with her, I think she truly believes that our democracy is at risk with some of the things that are happening. And we should not, how do I want to put this? It's sad that we have to hold someone up like this as essentially almost a hero for, even if you disagree with her thinking on Donald Trump, she's truly willing to sacrifice her career for what she believes. That should be the norm. That should be the standard. And it's sad that it's so rare that when it does happen, it's shocking to us.
I'm thinking of another example, Earl Pomeroy. I like Earl Pomeroy a lot. He took a vote on Obamacare that I did not agree with. I did not want Obamacare to pass, but he took the vote, and then he went on the ballot again, and he asked North Dakotans to support him anyway, and he tried to explain why he did it, and he believed what he did was right. I don't think it was. I didn't like that vote, and I say that. I mean, that's obviously a much different thing than Donald Trump is attacking the very foundations of our republic. Earl Pomeroy just took a vote in Congress that I didn't like, but was willing to stand beside it, right, and go down fighting. I thought that was so worthy of respect. I think that's what you got to do sometimes. If you think the voters are wrong, then you got to stand up to them and you got to try to convince them or accept the fact that they're going to elect somebody else into office. That's the way the system's going to work. Liz Cheney was damn the consequences, is doing what she thinks is right. And honestly, that's so rare in politics today. It's almost like spotting a dinosaur in the forest, which is the metaphor I used in my column today. I'm very proud of it, as you can tell.
I guess what concerns me, I think we'll see her run for something again one day, but it bothers me to no end that Donald Trump is on this vengeance tour. He not tweeted on his social media network, put out a message that said, "You're fired," harkening back to his old TV show about her losing her seat in Congress. And she lost, and in losing, he demonstrated exactly what it is that she's fighting against, which is just totally disrespecting how our system should operate. So I am assuming he runs again. I'm guessing we're going to see her on the stage next to him running for president in a couple of years. I suspect she's not going to run to win. She has no chance of winning. She's not going to pull any Trump voters away from him. But I'll give Liz Cheney this much. She knows exactly how to get under his skin. And as a American who does not want to see him in the Oval Office again, I am looking forward to all the meltdowns she's going to create next to him on a debate stage.
I am looking forward to. I have enjoyed and look. And I don't want to say even looking forward to it. I am glad that there was somebody out there making the conservative case against Donald Trump, right? Because our friends in left, and all due respect to them, they're entitled to their point of view. That's the progressive point of view on Donald Trump, the liberal point of view on Donald Trump. There is a conservative that rises above ideology, a reason to oppose Donald Trump, and I'm glad she's going to be out there making it. I was sad to see her lose, but here we are. This is where we're at in politics. I wish more people had the courage to stand up and do the right thing rather than the safe thing that's going to get them reelected.
I would encourage those who didn't get a chance to see it to go on YouTube and find her concession speech. I love how she demonstrated that in a civil society, in a democracy, when you lose, you concede and you support the winner. And I thought she did that well. And I thought she gave just a fantastic speech that didn't really defend conservatism necessarily, although she did touch on it. And of course, I disagree with those things, but just defended democracy and the rule of law. And even if you disagree with how she feels about Trump, if you disagree with her message about defending democracy, you really need to evaluate some things about what you actually believe. Not you, Rob, of course, but just the listener.
Right.
You really need to evaluate what your actual belief system is if the stuff Liz Cheney says gets you angry.
I posted a column about this. My headline was "Would that we had more like Liz Cheney," and some of the response I was getting from my left-wing readers was, "Oh, she's anti-abortion and rah, rah, rah," just it's like I think you need to realize right now. It's fine that you disagree with her on those things. I think you need to realize right now that what she's defending is something bigger than these policy differences that we have. She's defending a system that allows us to operate within it and have those policy differences and debate them out. That's what she's defending. And right now, I think everybody needs to stand behind her at least that far. I'm not saying that you have to vote for her to be back in Congress or anything, but there's a point at which, I'm sorry, you just got to stand up for the right thing, and I think she is. Well, that's all the time. Oh, sorry, you had something else to add?
No, I was just going to say, I think, like I said, history will treat her well. I think it's a shame, to your point, that a lot of these Republicans aren't going to be in Congress anymore. I think we're going to be worse off because of it. And hopefully we're able to come through all this in a couple of years and be in better shape than we are now. But I think we're heading into a rough couple of years for our country. So we'll have to see how our politicians handle that.
Yeah, I do want to make one more point. One thing I'm hearing a lot of people saying is that because I think some Republicans are trying to put lie to the idea that Liz Cheney lost because she wasn't sufficiently loyal to Donald Trump. Because I still think that makes the whole Trump idolatry thing, I think, makes a lot of Republicans uncomfortable because it's so true. it makes them feel really uncomfortable. So what I'm hearing some of them are saying was, well, she didn't lose because she wasn't loyal to Donald Trump. She lost because she went along with Democrats in their show trial on the January 6th committee, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sorry, you're kidding yourselves. You're kidding yourself. There are things about the way the January 6th committee was constituted that I don't necessarily like. But her say this started before the January 6th committee came along, right? She was censured by her state party well before she was ever on the state. I mean, this was absolutely about somebody who was insufficiently loyal to Donald Trump and has now been forced to pay a political price for it. And if you believe otherwise, you're kidding yourself.
Totally agreed. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see what November holds. I think it's going to be more interesting both in North Dakota and nationally than I would have given it credit for a couple of months ago.
Well, that's
which is good news.
Hey, coming up on the next episode, Kevin Kramer is going to be joining me. So we'll be talking about a lot of these issues. I'm sure he has some thoughts maybe on Liz Cheney and some other things. So we'll talk with him. That's coming up on Friday. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk again. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.